Hello, Chris. Hello, everyone,
Right.
to our new Embrace the Darkness podcast. I'm here with Dr. Christopher Barnes, who is a senior lecturer. Let's try and get that out properly in psychology at the University of Derby, and he came to my attention through Dark Sky International and some other stuff that I read about him, and just has some really interesting work that he's been doing around light pollution and nature connectedness. But I'll let him get into that. So thank you so much, Chris, for joining us today.
You're
Um,
welcome.
Thank you. So I guess the first thing I like to ask people is to tell us a bit about a memory about being out in the darkness under night skies. What has that meant to you?
Oh, I think so much really. And my first memory, I guess, of kind of really feeling that connection of experiencing something special was on a family holiday to Denmark. And it was unknown to me at the time that I was actually in a dark sky location. And we'd been to this, me and my wife, a long time ago without children. But on this occasion, we kind of decided to take the children there. A very relaxing place where we're kind of going amongst the sand dunes. And I knew that the Perseid meteor shower was coming in August. And to some extent, I was kind of prepared. I was looking forward to it, but nothing quite prepared me then for looking up that night and being underneath pretty much pristine dark skies. It was just beautiful, and the children were up late. That didn't matter. We were on holiday, and so we just thought, let's get out on this decked area. Let's all go on the recliners that are out there, and let's just spend some time looking up. And it was just amazing. And I think it was a particularly good year. This is a couple of years ago now, and we were having maybe three, four, five, six comets, really great ones, and the visibility. It was just must have been good seeing that night, and it was just wonderful. And so I guess that's one of the first memories and experiences I wanted to share with you. But also, we then kind of subsequent to that visited Northumberland, where I did know there was some dark sky areas after that. And I'd only really seen the Milky Way in passing in kind of quite light polluted areas before that. And so I'd kind of recognize it, but it was fairly non-eventful, didn't look that spectacular. But we were driving over the moors one of the evenings on our way back to the holiday home that we'd rented. And it was just, it was even better. It was, and you could see architecture of the Milky Way itself, the ruffling of the milky clouds of the Milky Way, and it was properly arcing right across the sky. And I think it was that moment, similar to the first one, really awe-inspiring experiences that probably we take for granted, but that was just, if you stop and you notice and you take attention to it, it was just incredible, and we all loved it. Maybe me a little bit more.
I mean, I can see it now. Yeah, what a fantastic description and evocation you've given there of those places, of the sand dunes in Denmark and that Milky Way over the beautiful Northumberland sand landscape.
Mm.
Amazing. So you're a senior lecturer in psychology. So
Mhm.
yeah, so how have you incorporated this into your work? Where have you gone with it?
It's probably best not to give you the whole historical kind of track record in it, but actually my background is as a developmental psychologist. I work with families and parents and children, particularly newborn children, in clinical settings. And in around about 2017 or so, at my university, nature connectedness, people's connection to nature and its relationship with things like their mental health and well-being, their pro-conservation behaviour and other kind of characteristics was really taking off, but not just at Derby, globally. I
Hmm.
think people were starting to recognise the importance of that. And so I had a conversation with one of the professors who headed up the group and said, what's really been done around kind of parenting and children and nature connectedness? And the answer I got was, well, not a lot really. So the cogs started turning. I thought, well, I'll dip into this. What's in the literature? What's been done? And sure enough, not very much. So kind of that began kind of my journey into people's, particularly parents' connection and children's connection to the natural world. And out of that, then, those experiences I described in Denmark, that actually became the catalyst for starting to take an interest in nature at night. It was kind of like a little light bulb moment following that Denmark trip in particular, where I thought, and because I'd already started to do this work on nature connectedness, I thought, well, I wonder what's been done now on nature at night, and any kind of psychological benefits that there might be from being outside, from doing simple activities. It might be bat watching, astronomy, all sorts of things, really. Anything that involves the night and being out in nature in that way. And there was even less. And I was actually quite struck by that. I was quite surprised. The only person that seemed to be doing something around the natural world at night and about the night sky particularly was a research professor in the United States. They published a bunch of kind of papers around it, but that was more about kind of people's attachment. It was an attachment object, the night sky, and so it felt less aligned and less attuned with my theoretical kind of underpinnings, and in particular the one that I subscribe to is the pathways to nature connectedness, and so it's that way. Sorry,
I just want to clarify what you mean by attachment objects, just because our listeners may not.
Of course, yeah. So it's in a very similar way that when humans or animals are first born, they have an attachment figure, whatever that person is, typically a parent, maybe the mother, and it's someone to latch onto. It's someone that provides a secure base. So in this sense, it was more from a particular avenue, psychodynamic, Freudian type theory, and it was using the night sky as that attachment and sort of secure base, something that people felt pulled to and attached to. So I hope that's kind of provided enough information.
Yes, that's great. Thank you. And yes, so that's not the way that you come at it.
No.
You mentioned these pathways to nature connectedness. I wonder if you might say a little more about those.
Yeah. So as I say, I think whilst the work that professor was doing was great, I mean, I think it was groundbreaking in a lot of ways to start thinking about the night sky in that way and start to publish academic research about it. It's not quite the same as thinking about the pathways to nature connectedness. And these is a theoretical route. There are 5 different ways in which people are hypothesized to both develop a connection and also be able to enhance their connection to the natural world. It's based, there's a paper that's been written, I think it was in 2017, which was really a seminal position paper, a really important piece of work that based it on other older theories, such as the biophilia hypothesis. So that's people's love and natural affinity for the natural world. So it had that kind of route into kind of its development and its testing, and now actually it's adopted worldwide. It's adopted within the UK in lots of different kind of ways, practically speaking, by places like the National Trust, the Scouting movement, and so they've adopted the pathways to nature connectedness. And it's not something that is overtly complex and difficult to understand. In fact, it's quite the contrary. It's quite opposite to that. So the 5 pathways, and there's lots of research that's been done around this to evidence the different pathways by which people connect to the natural world. And this will probably sound very, I guess, obvious to anyone that's listening to this when I mention the 5 pathways. So that they are about through the senses. We connect through our senses and that sensory experience of not just what we see, smelling flowers, listening to birds' song, that kind of thing, the full remit of all of our senses, the beauty that we find in nature, and that's very bespoke and individual to the person of what they might like. It might be seasonally related, like the autumnal colours when the leaves are about to fall from the trees, for example. It might be down to a tiny little flower or the flowers that are projections from moss, whatever it happens to be, things that people find beautiful, the sort of the grand scale, but also kind of the miniature and the macro too. And then there's the meaning that people create. Often when people go to different natural environments, it's because there's some personal level of connection and something that might be family-based, something where people have created memories, and they like going back for that reason. That's what reinforces their connection to the natural world. Maybe it's the coast, maybe it's the forest, the hills, wherever it happens to be. This is the part where I always forget one of the different pathways. So I've done this. What have I done? I've done the senses, I've done beauty, meaning, compassion, and
emotions.
Emotions. Yeah, I always seem to forget one of them at some point, or never mind. So perhaps it's best to come to emotion next. And the emotions are really the very things in which I was just describing, the awe and the wonder that's created by seeing something in nature. So this might be something out of the ordinary. So a good example of that is during the COVID pandemic. We had our conservatory doors open. We lived next to some open water and some trees, and in flew a bird into there at breakfast time. And I was like, oh my goodness, what's happened? And it looked like a nuthatch. And I thought, oh, there's a nuthatch. I'll open the door. But then the blue was then actually turquoise. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is it's a kingfisher. And so it was flapping a little bit about on the ledge. We were all going crazy, and it's these moments, these standout moments, that are sometimes so important. You don't have to always do anything prolonged and complicated to connect to nature. It's the experience of everyday wonder in those ways, and just finding things that are important to you and that help you connect.
Make you feel something.
Yes, exactly. Like the Milky Way felt to me, or the comets, or the kingfisher. It can be everything and anything. And then the last one is compassion. So that is the care that people take for the natural world, and the way in which they feel motivated to look after nature in all manner of different things. Maybe it's feeding the birds, maybe it's making a bird box, or installing a bird box, picking up litter. So these are the 5 pathways which people can either the way that they typically will connect to the natural world, and the strength of that connection, or it's ways in which we might target and enhance people's connection to the natural world. And that is essentially the theory that I've now applied to the natural world at night, because it's not different in the sense that it's still nature and it's still the natural environment, but it's, for me, a very different experience from being outside at night. And there are different challenges that we face personally in either finding an appropriate place, or finding a place that we feel is suitable enough to go and enjoy some of those things in the night.
So the 5 pathways, senses. So using all your senses, pausing and smelling the roses, or looking at a tiny piece of moss, or so sense, eyes, ears, bird song. The second one was beauty, and just finding something beautiful out there. The third one was meaning, so that sort of connection that you have maybe through a childhood memory or a family memory, or just something that has a meaning to you. The fourth one was emotions, and you talked about that sense of wonder and that lovely memory of the kingfisher and the bright turquoise. And then the fifth one is compassion, and how we work to look after and care for nature, and perhaps how we feel nature cares for us as well. That kind of
absolutely, and maybe it's a good point to add is that I guess I've already said there's nothing always complicated about developing and enhancing that connection, and what the research tells us is it's just simple activities that help us do that. And it's not about the amount of time that we spend trying to connect to nature or being in nature. It's about the quality of the experience that you create, taking time to stop, to pause, and just enjoy things, because quite often we'll be out for a particular purpose or task, but actually we don't always then tune into nature and kind of notice nature, and that's what is the key.
It could even just be a minute on a dog walk or something, and just picking something just to stop and listen to the bird song, or if you see something beautiful, just stopping and having a look at that. Picking up a piece of litter. Lovely.
And I suppose I should say the science. It's not just what I say. It's the science is there as evidence that, statistically speaking, we've seen that it's not the amount of time that people spend. It is these quality experiences, and it is very much doing things like listening to bird song, taking pictures of nature. Those kinds of things are very effective in increasing this connection.
Fantastic. Well, that's great. I would absolutely encourage anyone listening to give those a go. And maybe we'll pop something about them in the show notes. Um, so then you were doing this work around nature connectedness and children and maternity and all that kind of stuff, bringing your two research interests together, and then you moved into thinking about these pathways at night.
I
So
did.
yeah, I can see all sorts of ways, but yeah, tell me about that.
Yeah, so I think that the fundamental kind of piece of work that I thought was necessary, first of all, was not a theoretical paper to talk about necessarily the direct applications and sort of like for like comparison of daytime nature connected pathways with nighttime nature connected pathways. That's of course important to help sort of define somewhere along the route, but it was more about, well, how do we measure someone's connection to the natural world at night, and particularly towards the night sky?
Mm.
And so I went through kind of a standard research process of developing a survey, a measure. They're called psychometric scales. And it's because we tried to go through well standardized routes and processes of developing that. So my first job was to make sure I knew what literature existed. Very little in terms of the
Okay.
nighttime,
Yeah.
but quite a lot to pull from in terms of the daytime. There were no real similar measures other than nature connectedness measures that exist, which talk about our connection or our relatedness and where we see ourselves in terms of that positioning of either part of nature and within it, or whether we see ourselves at the other extreme, which is above nature, and we are kind of commanders of all that dominion. And so the more connected we are, obviously, the more we see ourselves as part of that same natural kind of web. So I began to do some interviews. I was fortunate enough to interview about 15 to 20 people. We're not looking for vast amounts of people when we're doing the interviews. It's really just to gauge opinion and views around the way in which, at least I wanted to look at, the way in which people conceptualize that connection to the natural world at night. So I interviewed all sorts of people, ranging from astrophysicists and dark sky advocates, all the way to general members of the public who just enjoy going out and maybe camping under the stars. And so a really vast array of people that do it either just personally because they're interested in occasionally looking up or being in nature at night, or to those people who do it professionally. And there was a really wonderful conversations I had with people from right around the world. I had people in Australia, New Zealand, Belgium, the United States, South Africa. It was all over the place. And it was really quite interesting to go from one time zone to the other, kind of talking to people across Bangladesh and then going to kind of mainland Europe. And there was a real kind of mixture of thoughts and processes. And I used the pathways to nature connectedness to see and sort of shape the questions that I would ask people to see, well, what is the sensory experience like at night for you, kind of when you're going out? And there was, if I can, I guess, just add some detail to that a little bit, is that sometimes when we're out, and in particular, there was this one astronomer who did that, an amateur astronomer, and they like to go out to kind of middle of the nowhere, a complete field. And they said, you could hear a pin drop, literally, and the quietness was a real huge thing for them. It wasn't, and so it was almost like the hum of the day and all of the busyness kind of went away, and it was this time for relaxation, restoration, and that quiet. And I guess we don't often do that because we've got busy lives, we've got maybe children or families, and it's just nonstop and from dusk till dawn, and so. These were moments that were very special because it was just a unique kind of sensory experience, let alone kind of what you could see. And there was another one, a photographer who I interviewed from Scotland. And so they go out photographing kind of dark sky locations, looking at the stars and how they reflect in kind of natural water surfaces and things like that. And one experience that they had was that they were out in the moors somewhere, and obviously there's no one else around for miles and miles and miles, and you can hear obviously everything, but suddenly from behind her, she said she heard this breath out. It was like a proper exhale. It was like, and she was like, oh my goodness, what on earth is that? So she slowly turned around, and it was a huge stag
Oh,
right
wow.
behind her that had kind of crept up. And she just thought, what do I do? So she just sort of turned around, and the stag sort of tootled off, on its kind of merry way. So I think I was trying to gather then, all of this different information about what's the experience like, what's light pollution like where you live, and how does that maybe affect and impact kind of what you can see and what you'd like to see along the way. So all of those thoughts and experiences and beliefs helped shape the questions that would ultimately end up in the new measure that I had developed based on the Pathways to Nature Connectedness, any other previous literature that existed too. So I developed what then was a pool of questions. This kind of eventually kind of whittled down to about 12. And then I needed to statistically test that along with kind of other similar and different measures and sort of see what was the case. Was the scale valid and reliable? Could we
Hmm.
use it? So, which is the main purpose of doing the study in the first place, which is once we've got a valid measure in which we can kind of tap into people's connection to the natural world at night, well, that opens up then, obviously where there is no measure previously before that's appropriate. And unfortunately, and as the paper published just last year showed, that the scale was highly significant and valid. And alongside that, I was looking at how it related to things like people's mental health and well-being, and all the kinds of different factors that might tie into that. Controlling for variables wherever I could that might interfere with whatever we might find. And I also hypothesized and looked to see whether the scale would respond in predictable kind of ways. So I recruited specific groups in that section of the study. Overall, we had about 450 people take part, largely from the UK. And I recruited people who were astronomers and non-astronomers, because I was hypothesizing, well, if you're an astronomer, you're more likely to have had time to develop this closer connection to the natural world at night, and particularly to the night sky. And that is exactly what the part of the research evidence showed. And I guess not only that, whilst I'm talking about findings from the study, we also saw that the more connected people felt to the natural world at night, with the score that they obtained from completing the questionnaire, then the higher their mental health and well-being was. It was a relatively it was a significant finding, but it was a smaller proportion of that, because there's lots of things in people's lives, obviously, that make them feel good or bad in terms of their mental health. But it was really interesting to see that the size of this effect was still quite pronounced.
So it's yes, like you say, lots of ways that we can improve our mental health and well-being, but being connected to nature at night and getting outdoors at night is a significant way that we can improve
Yes.
our health and well-being,
Yes,
essentially.
and I think it's probably added to the nature in the day. So I think
Yes.
obviously
Okay.
they're not inseparable,
No.
and I think so probably people who also are higher connection to daytime nature, and then also additionally have this affinity for the night, will
Tonight,
probably
yeah.
reap additional benefits than ordinarily would.
So there's now this tool that academic psychologists can use to do research around measuring
Correct.
people's connectedness at night.
Yes.
Wow, that's very, very exciting. You mentioned light pollution with that. So how does that fit into the scale? Does it come, I don't know, under the compassion pathway, or does it kind
Yeah.
of, yeah, how does that fit in?
Yeah, so light pollution is, of course, like a factor of our environments.
Mhm.
And so, one thing I was really keen to understand, and see whether the scale was responding in a predictable way, was that I made an assumption it's probably not difficult to then believe that the more light polluted where someone lives, the less they can see the night sky and the natural environment. That there are other obviously ramifications of light pollution in terms of impacting things like our sleep. But in terms of just light pollution severity of the night sky, we saw this was related not in that particular study directly to people's well-being, but we saw that it was related to people's level of connection. So I guess, unsurprisingly, when people live in highly light polluted areas, they don't feel connected at all to the night sky. So there's a bit of an indirect relationship between light pollution severity, people's connection to the night sky, and the resulting benefit to their well-being. So therefore, you only have to then backwards kind of interpret that if you reduce the light pollution where someone lives, or if they already live in a less light polluted area, they'll probably be reaping that kind of additional benefits.
So yeah. So like you say, it's not not been proven to have a direct link, but there is that indirect assumption that you can make. That come to the International Dark Sky Reserves and improve your health and well-being, which would be the way that perhaps some people would interpret that. But
though I should probably add, it wasn't significant in that first study, but it was probably because even though 400 might sound like quite a large sample of people, it was what we would call underpowered in the statistical finding. So it means that there's not quite enough people in the study to reach statistical significance. So this isn't necessarily a way of cooking the books, because then we use on top of that something called effect size. So we're kind of looking for either small, medium, or large effects of a particular phenomenon or thing that we're kind of looking in. And that's why in a study that I've not quite published yet, but where we've recruited 1,800 people from across the UK, we've looked at things like, we wanted to control for things like green cover, income deprivation, light pollution severity, and look and kind of have these in the same statistical model and kind of see what happens when we kind of can control for lots of those aspects that we might think might interfere with the light pollution well-being link. And sure enough, when we start controlling for these factors in that much larger sample of 1,800 people, we have found the direct link between light pollution severity and people's mental health and well-being. Again, it's a small but significant link that we kind of can find there. So your statement about, yes, come to Dark Sky Parks, it's good for you, is absolutely true, because there is something to it for sure.
So it's a piece of the puzzle. It's not necessarily the whole thing, but it's an important piece of the puzzle.
Absolutely.
That's fantastic. So you mentioned, so you've been doing more research and are looking to publish more papers around this. I think the last time we spoke, you mentioned you've been looking at the Astronomy for Mental Health Institute. Yes, was it the Office for Astronomical Development? What about that kind of work?
So that is one kind of study that's still a little bit ongoing at the moment, but I can mention it very briefly at the moment. So it's the International Astronomical Union, and collaborating together with colleagues based there in South Africa. There's a number of other partners that kind of I'm working with. So one of the people I published with the first paper with is based in Canada. So we're working together on that same project, and there's also someone from North America, and actually it's growing. So without kind of going into all of the different countries that are now collaborating on that project, as you might imagine, we're from what I've said, we're looking at globally what is the differences between people and their connection to the natural world based on kind of where they are geographically in the world, whether that's the global north or the global south, from east to west, in inner city areas to outer kind of more rural settings. And the idea is that we'll have hundreds, if not thousands, of people that take part in that study. And the reason, kind of impetus for that, is there's actually been a kind of a similar piece of work that was carried out with daytime nature connectedness probably in 2021, I think the paper was published. They looked at nature connectedness across 15 European countries only. But what they essentially found, of those 15 European countries, they had about 1,000 participants in each of those countries. Wow. They found that the UK was the lowest for nature connectedness, and also one of the almost the lowest for well-being. And so it's probably saying something maybe about a wider cultural mindset and approach. It's not going to ever apply to everybody, and there will be people probably listening now who love nature and who are part of it and reap many of the benefits. But what the data seems to demonstrate in what's happened so far is that there's something about a difference between countries and the way in which they think and about nature. So in essence, the collaboration now with the International Astronomical Union is to kind of mirror that to some extent, but we will be looking at some European countries, but not all. We want to look really, really, really broad across non-traditional countries as well, and just see what happens. So that's kind of midway and part way through. But I do have other studies which are kind of under review at the moment, where we've been looking at things like people's conservation behaviour towards the natural environment at night and protection specifically from light pollution. So I could tell you a little bit about that. And also more recently, we've got a DEFRA funded project working with children, looking at the importance of spending a night underneath the stars in residential settings and the benefits that has with children, where currently we've collected around 660 odd children have formed part of that, where we're kind of measuring before and after they go on their residential trips and looking at the benefit that could be. So would you like me to tell you about any of that?
I would love, yeah, I'd love to hear about both of those things. Yeah, we have an initiative here that's called Discover the Downs, and we try to get kids out, not residentially, unfortunately, but certainly to get out under the stars. And I know that that's a big thing for us here. So yeah, I would love to hear about both of those things. In fact, yeah.
So I guess it's important to say that some of these projects are part way through, so we're still data collecting. But what the initial data from the children tends to tell us, that spending this time out in natural environments and doing different activities, simple activities in nature at night, do in fact have this benefit. The predominant sample is around about sort of 9 and 10-year-olds who've completed the range of different measures that we've got. We've got measures of nature connection, general ones. We've got measures of well-being, but we've also importantly got my new measure around connection to the natural world at night. And generally the findings showing that spending this time, even if it's very brief, does have this impact on the level of connectedness. So in essence, we can change the way someone feels about their connection, even within several days of taking part in a residential activity. So that I think that's fairly good, that we know that we can have that impact on children. And maybe as a slight aside, it's interesting that the data seems to show that there's a teenage dip in connection to nature. Now those 8 and 9 and 10-year-olds are actually almost at that peak of nature connectedness during childhood, because then it dips in the early teenage years, and actually people don't regain that same level of nature connectedness until they're pretty much mid-20s and 30s again. So that's really interesting to note. Kind of we're kind of find these similar kinds of patterns with children when they engage in nature at night. The other project, which is about how people look to conserve natural environments at night, is I developed a second measure. So I won't go into all the ins and outs of how I did that, but in essence, it's based on things like the Dark Sky Association's responsible lighting principles. It's based on other similar measures of conservation, environmental behaviour. And the reason I kind of developed one specific to light pollution is none exists. And so if we're looking to measure how people try to conserve natural darkness and prioritize it as an important, and try to reduce or look after the way in which they use light responsibly in and around where they live, then we needed a scale to kind of measure that too. So that was kind of phase 2 of a bigger, wider project that I've been doing. Um, so as part of that kind of project, I was interested to know kind of what are the most important factors in predicting whether someone will want to look after the night sky. So I used a statistical kind of process whereby you load factors in an order, and so it's a way, it's called hierarchical multiple regression. That's not necessarily important. The important thing is that you put different factors that you think are important in different steps and stages, and
Yeah.
so you input the one that you think is probably likely to have the most effect last. It may not, but you often put it in last. So for me, in the first part of that first model and stage, I was looking at the general things that I already knew had a relationship to people's conservation behavior. So age is a thing that often relates to whether people will be engaging in conservation behavior. The older we get, the more inclined we are to do that. I wanted to look to see whether light pollution severity would impact whether people are likely to go out to conserve, because in that first study I mentioned and I have published, I found that people with a greater connectedness generally attempted to look after the night sky a little bit more. I wanted to see whether that was the same recurring pattern. I also looked at the amount of time that they spent out in the natural world, because in the daytime we'd found that it doesn't matter how long people spend out. Actually, even short amounts of time are really important. So I loaded those kind of factors in first. They were all significant at that stage of the model. So I progressed to the second stage of the model, and that's where I added in some psychological variables. I was looking at resilience, mindfulness, and compassion. They were all significant at that point, as were sort of the first ones in the model still carry through. So all of those things around age were still significant, and those new psychological variables were then significant. So everything's significant at that point. And then in the final model, I load in people's connection to the natural world at night. And that's where all of those factors that have been significant are then no longer significant in the model.
Wow.
The only thing that's significant is people's level of connection to the night sky. And that was the single biggest and only predictor. So that's what's explaining all of this variance and statistical kind of variance that's kind of going on. So that was a brilliant finding and amazing to kind of find as well. So the importance of that is, if we want to improve the way in which people look after the night, the way that they engage in environmental and conservation type behaviors, we need to target their connectedness. And to target their connectedness, we just need to get them to do simple activities out in night. So it's not rocket science.
No, as they say, yes, indeed.
Oh yeah, sorry about the pun. But I think that's been an incredible finding, and that paper is currently under review, so I'm hoping it will be out maybe sometime this year. But it's wonderful to see that the similar patterns that we find in daytime nature connectedness are echoed across the night, and the kind of the importance of some of these things that we should do if we want to increase that connection to benefit our well-being and to increase the likelihood of us looking after our environment. Yeah.
Well, that blows my mind. Although I know it personally, it's just really good to have, that evidence basis for it. Really exciting. So look forward to seeing that paper published and reviewed and all that stuff that goes on in science journals. Thank you so much. That's that's a really exciting finding, and something perhaps we can really start to think about here at the national park. So yes, well, I had a chat with our health and wellbeing officer on one of these podcasts earlier. So I think that'll be another chat with her. Great. So we've had a really nice chat. What is there anything you would like to add? It's been really wonderful. So I know you do some outreach stuff as well. So is there anything about that you'd like to add?
I do. I think that I think there's probably a very strong importance and place for working civically, so kind of locally,
Mhm.
with local organizations, not necessarily always just the big organizations like the wildlife trusts, for example, who do an amazing job,
Mm.
but sort of grassroots astronomy groups.
Mm.
I think these are all important things, and they're the kind of simple activities that people can do to help foster this connection to the natural world at night. So I think that if people listening to the podcast kind of want to know, well, how do I, you know,
Mm.
enhance my connection? Well, it's obviously just going out and doing and kind of experiencing and finding what works for you. There'll always be, I suppose, the bit that I will add is that there's always going to be in the background about the challenges. And so having somewhere to go that we know is safe and that we feel safe in going to. Sometimes it's your own back garden, but not everybody has one. Sometimes to get to a truly dark location to kind of reap some of the benefits, at least from the night sky, are a bit more difficult unless you kind of live next to national parks like the lovely South Downs, which I know can then help facilitate that. So I guess it's really just about finding places that are safe, that you know you can go to, understanding and realizing that you don't have to spend long out there, because most of the time when we can see the night sky best is in the winter months when it's
Yes.
cold, rainy, cloudy, all of the above.
Yes.
And that presents a challenge. We don't often want to go out, but even if it's for a few minutes, taking out the bins or walking the dog, these are the moments where you can go, do you know what? I'm just going to stop, listen, see what's around me, just take 5 minutes extra kind of doing that and see what you find. And I'm really fortunate where I live because kind of being close to this forest, we have owls that hoot
Mm.
most nights. And I've only seen it once or maybe twice kind of fly over when I was taking out the bins. And so, yeah, so I think the everyday experiences are just as important as kind of going out and camping under the night or doing a bat watching session or doing a bug trap and trying to see whether you can catch any moths and experience that. So many different ways I think we can try to enjoy the night and reap the benefits of it.
Yeah, yeah. I think Kate, our health and wellbeing officer, she talked about making friends with the night, and yeah, there's just something about that, isn't there? Like you say,
Mm,
taking the just a couple of extra minutes in your
mm,
evening just to be outdoors, whether it's clear or cloudy. There's just, what's the how do you feel differently about that? Or yeah, do you notice the different levels of light pollution, perhaps? Or
mm.
there's just what do you notice?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, I'm really fortunate I get to uh, walk with my partner and his dog, and that's just been really special. Just to,
Mm.
yeah, having that regular getting out at night
Yeah,
is really
absolutely.
special. So yeah, um, fantastic. Though that's yeah, really great suggestions there. Yes, and I think you also mentioned moonbathing. I rather like that
Okay.
suggestion as well. The last time we spoke, as a way
Yes.
of connecting. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know that there are lots of organisations right across the UK and probably the world too that do similar types of things.
Mm.
There are elements where you might imply kind of being mindful. It's just really slowing down,
Mm.
taking notice, walking slowly, regulating your breathing, taking in kind of your surroundings. And in the daytime, that's often paired with things like what people may have heard of before, forest bathing,
Hmm.
and kind of again, that's a very sensory based experience of
Mm.
finding something. But when people are out at night, and the studies that we're kind of running at the moment are really just about kind of taking that time in a safe space with a group of others to kind of benefit and just kind of look. You can see so much detail in the moon a lot of the time, can't you?
Mm.
And you don't actually need any fancy equipment lots of the time. Yes, binoculars and telescopes kind of help you see the finer details, but on the night like the last kind of nights here in January when it's the wolf moon
Yeah.
and you've got that real intensity and glow and shimmer of the moon and it lights up everything, and it's kind of
Yes.
it's natural light pollution, but it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And so I think that Yeah, so one of the things that I'm doing with several colleagues are to look at the benefit when we take people out in a similar way that we would do with forest bathing, and kind of seeing what we're doing it at night, and kind of seeing whether there are similar types of benefits that we might get from that.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, I look forward to continuing this conversation. It sounds like the work you're doing is really relevant to the work we want to do here at South Downs National Park. And yes, it's just all really interesting, and I've really enjoyed speaking with you. So yeah, thank you for taking your time to be with us. And I'm looking forward to hopefully meeting you in person sometime in the not too distant future.
That sounds wonderful. Thank you so much for the invite. I've really enjoyed speaking to you about my work, and yeah, happy to talk again.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Embrace the Darkness, presented by me, Elinor Newman. The podcast is recorded and produced by the South Downs National Park Authority from the South Downs International Dark Sky Reserve. Music is by Orbit DoD, direct from Upbeat. To find out more about the South Downs International Dark Sky Reserve, including the best places to stargaze, go to www.southdowns.gov.uk/dark skies. If you have a comment, suggestion, or any other thoughts, we would love to hear them. You can contact us on embracethedarkness@southdowns.gov.uk. And if you've enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a rating or a review. And until next time, embrace the darkness.